Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution, those dirty fuels are burning, the earth's whole climate's churning, clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill, fossil fuels are cheap, wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
A long time since I said that, Dave.
About 2 or 3 years, right? A lot has happened in between then and now, but
Yeah.
band back together. We're not quite like the Rolling Stones touring in their 70s and 80s, but
Not yet. So it's been 2.5 years or so since the last episode, which turned out to be our most popular episode. Maybe because that's just the only one you can download if you click on us accidentally. But we'll assume that there's a lot of interest in Aristotle on education and that really went viral. Demand for more from us. And so we're a little slow, perhaps responding to the people's acclaim, but here we are.
and the onslaught of support after that last episode it's hard to kind of get through the sorting through the fan mail and all the
Right.
rest.
Yeah, no, there were a couple emails we got. So yeah, that was exciting. It's always good to hear from the people. So Dave, let's bring her up to date on what you've been up to and where you're at this point. Beautiful view out your window, I can see.
So we moved to Colorado Springs this past year in November. So we've almost been here for about a year. We still own a house in Texas, in Valverde, but at the beginning of 2023, I moved on to an organization called American Classical Education, which is an offshoot of Hillsdale College's effort to reform K through 12 education in the country. So it was a great opportunity to join an organization that was doing, I think, really good work across the country. The work basically amounts to working with local groups who want to build classical schools of either the private or the charter sort,
Great.
and helping them in terms of getting organized, putting together a project management plan, hiring a good school leader and a leadership team, and then helping those folks work in community engagement and all the rest. So the good news is that we had 2 schools that opened this past August, one in Prattville, Alabama, which is outside of Montgomery, and the other in Laverne, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. We have a 3rd school that's opening in South Carolina in the Charleston area in the fall of 2025, and hopefully 2 or 3 schools a year thereafter. So the hope is to try to have these schools be excellent sources of education for the young, but then really integrated with the community that they're a part of, so they kind of build a strong civic life wherever they're planted. So that's what I've been up to, and you too have switched jobs, so to speak, no longer at the King's College, and now you're some fancy executive. Is that correct? I see.
That's right. Yeah, we moved from New York to New Jersey, which I swore I would never live in New Jersey. You grew up in Pennsylvania. New Jersey is where you dump your toxic waste. That was always the way we thought about it. And then, of course, if you live in New York, New Jersey is just this bedroom community for New York City folks. So nevertheless, here we are. We have a nice house here. Actually, we moved closer to our church and church community. So we're actually very happy about that. But yeah, King's has essentially closed, hasn't been able to educate students for now 2 academic years. And so I moved on. I'm now the president of a small custom software development company. I haven't started to learn how to code. That was something I actually studied basic way back in the day, and knew how to do a few things in high school, but I run the business side of the operations and enjoy very much working with my former pastor, who's the owner of the company. And it's been great being able to stay locally. And, our kids are now We have a senior and a junior in high school thinking about colleges. It was a big thing for us. They were all planning on going to King's, so we're on to Plan 2.0, but we've got some thoughts about where they might land and looking for continuity. And so we're real happy to be able to be in the area.
Yeah, that's been the interesting aspect of our lives the last 6 years. When I left King's in 2018 for California for Providence Christian, and we were there, give or take 2 or 3 years, given COVID, and
Right.
then in Texas. So when we moved to Colorado last October, Katie said, "This is going to be the house we die in." So hopefully not soon, but
Right.
continuity to be in one place. And the funny thing about Colorado, we didn't know this until we moved here, is that they don't like Californians and they don't like Texans. So
Perfect.
ops are not in their favored group. So we always say we're from New Hampshire and that kind of.
There you go.
Really happy here. The kids are now in 5th and 7th grade. I'm coaching Jack's 5th grade basketball team.
Neat.
Lots is almost 13, going on 25, and still alive.
Right.
But they're real happy. Have a lot of great friends here. We have great church here, and I think we're settled. We're not moving anywhere in 2 years, God willing. So it's good
Right.
to have a home for the long haul.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as we were thinking about doing this brief comeback tour, as it may be, I was wondering, do we need to get a new song? Because, of course, Fred Lancia was very generous in allowing us to use his music, 2020 Vision. I thought, well, it's now 2024. But the reality is 2024 feels a lot like 2020. So I think the themes of the song fit well, and a lot of the dynamics of the race are similar to what they were 4 years ago. So, we're going to talk about our thoughts about the upcoming election, how we got here, make some probably unwise predictions, as we usually do at the end of the show with Tocqueville's crystal ball. But, one of the things that I was thinking about was, what would it take to actually break out of this cycle? Go back, don't think about like a Ronald Reagan, 84. We're not going to have those probably anytime soon, maybe never again. But think about like George H.W. Bush winning against Dukakis in 88. It was a nice, strong victory. I think he won by 8 or 9 points in the popular vote. It was like 400 to 100 in the Electoral College. So a clear mandate, if you will, a clear direction for the country. And President Obama had two fairly large victories over McCain and Romney in 2008 and 2012, but we really haven't seen a significant victory like that since George H.W. Bush back in 88. And certainly doesn't seem like the Trump era, if this may be the last election of the Trump era, is going to give us anything like a significant victory for one side or the other. So, Dave, what do you think? What would it take for us by 2028 to have broken out of this? Let's focus on these really narrow margins in these 7 critical states for 2 years leading up to election kind of cycle.
Well, I think it's a great question. And when I think through parameters of an answer to the question, I focus on one word, and that is consensus. Now, there were definitely divisions in the 20th century between different groups, different Americans, et cetera. And there were highlights of those divisions at times. You think of Vietnam, for example, being probably the most spectacular highlight of division in the country. But in broad terms, there was a consensus as to what America was, why it was here, what its purpose was, that a broad group of people, Democrat or Republican, bought into. I'm not saying that vision was 100% right. It certainly had its problems. But I think that consensus in the 20th century, especially prior to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, had to do with America being different than the rest of the world in its focus on some level of individual freedom, some notion of a collective good that could balance out with that individual freedom that played well to various constituencies. Now, there were cracks in that consensus that built after World War II and continued to grow. But I think now at the 2 decades, 3 decades into the 21st century, we have been for 40 years trying to arrive at a new consensus. And I just don't think we've been able to do that. And part of the issue is a division over what that old consensus meant for the United States. That's where I'd kind of begin with that word consensus. How about you?
No, I like that. I think you're right. And I think, probably if there's going to be a new consensus, it's not going to be the old Cold War era version, right? There's going to be something new. And that's the struggle, the post-Cold War era. What is the vision of America in the world? What is America's vision for its domestic life? What does it mean to have a peaceful domestic life where we don't feel like we're constantly battling? I don't even want to say red state versus blue because it's city versus country, right? I mean, it's at the micro level, town versus town sometimes in individual states. So how do we get past that? Is there a way to think about a way of life that's good for the cities and good for the countryside? Because I think if there's going to be a consensus, that's what it's going to have to be, because that's really where the heart of our division seems to lie. The city life is the home of progressivism, a certain kind of statist economic policies. These things, in some ways, are natural to cities. But then, is there a way to think about a life either where city and country make peace with each other and are able to live their lives separately under maybe a broader common shared vision that's a live and let live kind of vision? Or is there something more robust than that that actually is a shared vision of the common good that works, right, for those who live in the big city centers as well as those who live in the suburbs and the countryside?
Well, those are two interesting, I think, great alternatives. And I love the way that you just frame that you have on the one hand, okay, this would be passable to me. Right? Let it be, let it go. That was the mantra of those who had divisions with one another. I think that's better than where we are right now, where we can't let it be,
Yeah.
and we're angry by and large. Not everyone's angry, but then the second, kind of the recreation of a common good. And the only problem with let it be, let it go as a recreation of a notion of the common good is, oh, is that it? Just let it be and
Right.
let it. But then again, in a time where there are cracks within a society, civil society, and anger, violence, and all the rest, that may be the best possible for now. And so I wonder when I think about this election, certainly we have people we want to win, and you have a side in this, right? I think each of us may have a side in what happens next Tuesday, but I think longer term, beyond the election, what does the state of American peace look like as we move through the 21st century? Will we be able to get there? And how will we be able to get there, especially given elections and all the other things that go into making us the people that we are? We haven't got into the details of who's going to win on Tuesday, and throwing grenades. Pivot in that direction.
Yeah, we'll get there. But yeah, I mean, when I put my Publius hat on, I always am afraid to think about, well, if we just push everything down to the most local level, right? We know that the danger at the local level is the local faction. And we've been in communities where, boy, it was kind of tough, right? If you weren't an insider with the school board or the town selectman, you were going to have a difficult time. And so as much as it would be a nice solution, I think it would be better, certainly, than where we are today, if progressives in particular would decide we're not going to nationalize our way of life, that we're going to be content to control the cities, and people will be attracted to the way of life that we offer there, or they'll be repelled by it and they'll move somewhere else. But we'll allow you to live a different way in the countryside, in the suburbs. That would be progress. But we've been in communities even where you're in the political majority where it feels like, I don't know, is this really the common good that we're achieving here, or is it just one more local faction imposing its will, maybe in a smaller way, in a less headline-grabbing way, but nevertheless still using its power in ways that aren't particularly attractive or wholesome?
Yeah, agreed. So without creating a national empire, you can kind of create empires in your own backyard, and you can still have that imperial sensibility in how you deal with another. And I don't think either one of us right now is suggesting that somehow you lay down your opinions or you don't see the other person as being a threat to your way of life. I mean, I think part of being a discerning human being is realizing that what you want and what someone else wants and your definition of what's good and what their definition of good is different. And if they truly are, a threat to your way of life, there's a level of them being an enemy, right, from within. However, how do you recognize that in a discerning fashion and yet not hate that person? How do
Right.
you love enemies? So, we're not told to love our enemies by denying there is such a thing as friend and enemy, right? These are terms that have been there since there have been human beings. But I think the toning down at the local level or at the national level would amount to kind of loving your neighbor to the point where you love that person's liberty. You love that person's opportunity, right, to define their livelihood. And liberty doesn't work simply if you love your own liberty. It works when you love your neighbor's liberty.
Right. Right. Justice for me, but not for thee. Liberty on my terms, but not yours. Yeah, those are principles that just can't be the foundation for any kind of a consensus, any kind of a common good vision.
You say, and it's interesting. I mean, I certainly, I try to think of myself as kind of a thinking man's conservative, right? That's kind of the way I've always kind of identified. So I'm definitely a thinker, center right. But when I look at some of these opinions on the left when it comes to liberty, et cetera, I'm really can't believe the level of hypocrisy. This election, if I'm understanding correctly, the biggest issue for Vice President Harris is reproductive rights. Get the
Right.
government out of your bedroom. But this is just 2 or 3 short years after the COVID years where it wasn't your body, it wasn't your face, it wasn't your business, it wasn't any you had to do for the greater good what you were told to do. So the inconsistency as to what liberty means, to me, I think is a dangerous thing that boils down, I think in this election to, right, a choice between, and you mentioned this earlier, a progressivism that tends to be very imperial and a conservatism that needs greater definition for the 21st century, but I think is the better alternative given that it's not imperial.
I think that disappointed me with regard to abortion was how the Republican Party seemed to quickly embrace this idea that we want to resolve the matter at the local level. And obviously, that was something that was prevented by Roe versus Wade. And so Roe versus Wade opened that up as an opportunity. And, you and I taught Roe versus Wade for many years in colleges and kept telling students, look, if that's struck down, it doesn't mean there's a national ban on abortion. It means the states will have a chance to make policy. And that's preferable to the alternative. But it really gets us to the Stephen Douglas position, not the Abraham Lincoln position, right? We're talking about objective realities and human lives. And human life isn't defined differently in California from how it's defined in Texas. And so I think it was a mistake, an unfortunate choice for the party to change the platform in particular, which has called for a human life amendment since 1980, after 44 years, to have, in a sense, won the Supreme Court debate, but have given up the moral high ground and, in a sense, relativized the issue of abortion and said, well, it's really a state-by-state matter. And that's a disappointing development. And if we're going to be firm on one thing, if there's going to be one national policy that's worth fighting for, it would be an understanding of human life from conception all the way to natural death.
Well, this goes back to, and I think this kind of circles back again to this idea, moving forward as conservatives, and we're both conservatives, is what we're after a common good conservatism that would clearly define what that common good is, especially toward life? Or is it a let it be and let it go conservatism, which seems to be on the issue of abortion, where the party is going now? Or is it some combination, right, of the two things where you try to find that common ground and you're constantly trying to refine and enlarge public opinion, which I think that's what we've been trying to do all this time with our writings
Right.
and podcasts. So you don't give up the argument, you don't make moral compromises, but you pick and choose where you can develop that notion of the common good. So it seems to be a good question, kind of to leave the kind of broader picture of where the 2024 election is. Be interesting to hear from our listeners would they prefer a let it be, let it go conservatism, or conservatism really trying to refine, enlarge, and get to that kind of defined notion of what the common good is?
Let's now turn to the election itself. And of course, the key event in the election cycle was President Biden's choice to withdraw from the race in July, shortly after the first assassination attempt on President Trump, and at a point where, after the debate in June, it looked like President Trump was really on a strong trajectory toward victory. And that change in the short term shook the race up. Vice President Harris rose about 5 points in the polls relative to where Biden had been, and went from being, say, 3 points down to 2 points up. And there was talk of joy and vibes and brat, which I don't know really what that means, but that was a thing over the course of the summer. And she seemed to be, in some ways, cruising to her own victory. And then something happened. Early October, we had the reversal of the trajectory of the race. And so that was around the time of the Vance-Walz debate. It was also the time where Harris said she couldn't think of anything she would do different than President Biden, and in a sense tied herself more to the administration than perhaps she had been tied by the transition that happened over the course of the summer. So here we are now. We're just a few days out. We're recording this on Thursday, so 5 days from the election. Of course, many tens of millions have already voted, but election day proper is still 5 days away. Any thoughts, Dave, on the overall trajectory of the race? And then we can get into our what will probably be very bad predictions thereafter.
Yeah, I think that the Democrat Party did an outstanding job. Now, it has its advantages in working with the mainstream media and doing this, but in painting a picture, painting an artifice from July, August, September onward that was incredibly appealing to a percentage of voters who really hadn't been paying attention and who really didn't like President Trump, but wanted to know who the other person was. So I think that kind of explains the shift in Vice President Harris's popularity in July and August. I think the turn back, the pendulum swing in September and October had to do with two things. One, the reality, the economic reality for many Americans. So when you look at boilerplate issues like inflation and the economy and crime and immigration now in the 21st century, no painting of a picture or an artifice can draw you away from how much your groceries cost and what you get in one bag of groceries going down to your supermarket. When you look at whether you can afford a house or not, that's a reality, right? When you look, and if you're in the southern parts of the country where illegal immigration has become a great challenge to communities, you can't deny what you're seeing before your eyes. So no matter what you put on the television, no matter what you put in a podcast or an infomercial, there's the reality there. So I would argue that right now in this election, the reality very much favors a Trump victory. And this is why he's been hammering, were you happier between 2016 and 2020 than you are in the last 4 years? What was your economic position then as opposed to now? He's pointing to the reality on those boilerplate issues. But he's up against, right, a very fierce, well-organized attempt to define him and define his supporters and define reality differently. So that's how I would try to explain what's happened. And I think, and the other thing that happened that was really, really important, I think we've underestimated how important J.D. Vance's performance was in that vice presidential debate. I remember reading one response to the debate, and he said the two things that Vance did in that debate is they undercut arguments that the Democrat Party has made for 100 years. Number one, we're the smarter party. You looked at that stage, right? Tim Walz, for as affable as he was not smarter than J.D. Vance.
Right.
And then the second thing, we care more about average people.
Mm-hmm.
You see in J.D. Vance's approach, right, a lack of care, right, for average people. This was someone who had been an average person, a hillbilly himself. So those two things, I think, were very, very powerful representations of what the Republican Party, in my hope, becomes. That I think will have longer term implications. So I think that those would be my points there as to what happened over the last 3 or 4 months. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's another episode of the podcast sometime in the next 3 years, we may be talking about J.D. Vance and the post-Trump vision for that movement and the Republican Party and what it means if it's in the leadership of somebody like Vance. Yeah, I think that returning to the pocketbook issues is a great way of looking at what happened. You can ride on joy and vibes for a while, and look, there were 25% of the electorate back in May that told Pew that they didn't like either of the candidates. That was the record, the most double haters ever. And so what's that group going to do? Well, early on, they're probably just going to sit back and grumble. And then over the course of time, you start, okay, I guess I'll choose this one. I guess I'll choose that one. And so in the immediate aftermath of President Biden dropping out, there was all this energy. Well, not Biden, not Trump. Yes. And then they realized, oh wait, no, you said Kamala Harris, didn't you? You didn't say not Biden. I was all for not Biden, but I wasn't really for Kamala Harris. Why? Because, well, she's the vice president after all, and she's as tied to these policies as he is, and there's really nothing new here. Now, had the Democratic Party been able to pivot to somebody else, things could have gotten very interesting, and maybe that not Biden momentum would have continued on into the fall. And there would have been a possibility to paint two alternative visions of a post-Biden era. And so you're not so much tied to the last 4 years. And so you're able to weigh that against the Trump alternative. But that didn't happen. And again, Kamala Harris chose not to separate herself, even though she may have been able to, had she tried, from the administration, explicitly endorsed essentially the decisions that President Biden made. And so in consequence of that, those double haters said, oh, okay, so what we're really talking about is 4 more years of Biden, except maybe 8 more years of Biden, because Kamala Harris can do two of these. And so I really didn't like the last 4 years. I guess I'll hold my nose and I'll vote Trump. Now, that's not obviously everyone's judgment, but that's at the margins. That seems to be what's happening. And so if things continue on the trajectory that we've seen now for the last 6 weeks, that's the reason why Trump will win.
Agreed.
Well, let's go through this more particularly. So, we like to do our map. We like to look at the stats. We're both numbers guys from way back when. Let's think about what's going to happen in terms of some of these key states, right? So we know we're going by RealClearPolitics. That's our preferred site for these poll aggregate numbers. We know there's a number of states that are certainly going to go for Trump and certainly going to go for Harris. I don't think we need to talk about California. We don't need to talk about Oklahoma. We'll chalk those up where we expect them to land, where everybody expects them to land. What do you think about Colorado, Dave? You're there on the ground.
I think that it's just too steep of a hill to climb, but I think things are heading in the right direction here, though.
Okay.
It'd be not a narrow victory for the Harris campaign, but maybe 5% here, which should be showing for the Republican Party.
Yeah, both Colorado and New Jersey are in the likely Harris camp, according to RealClearPolitics. So I don't see anything in solid Harris or likely Harris that I'm going to quibble with. Right? I think she gets those electoral college votes. That gets her up to 191. Then we've got leans Harris, Maine, New Mexico, and Virginia. Not including that second district in Maine, but the two primary electoral college votes in Maine going to Harris, along with New Mexico and Virginia. Any quibbles with that, Dave?
So my broader take on the election, and I'm sure you'll have your own as well, is that this will either be a pretty big Trump win, which by big I mean he wins the popular vote by 2 or 3%. And if that were the case, I think that Virginia may be in play. And then that sounds, wow, if Virginia's in play, this will be a 320 to 218 election or something like that. But
right.
New Mexico, it's interesting. I truly believe that Trump is stronger in those southern states that are closer to the southern border. And I'd include Georgia and North Carolina there. I feel much more confident about his path to victory in the Sun Belt because of immigration. So I would say Maine, definitely Harris. New Mexico, probably Harris, depending on how immigration plays out. And Virginia, given there are so many government workers in those zip codes that would fall, just vote for Harris. Probably too much for him to get. New Mexico of those would be the one of the three that I think would. So let's give Harris, Maine, and Virginia. Mexico, I think, is more. New Mexico may be more of a toss-up.
Okay, so if we do that, then we are up to 206 for Harris and potentially 211 if you include New Mexico. Now we come to the toss-ups. You've already mentioned a couple of those. You talked about North Carolina. We've also got Arizona on that list. We've got Georgia, thinking about places that are the warm weather locations. Maybe we should start with that group. And Nevada as well. Very warm. Not entirely south, but certainly warm. So how about those four states? Which of those do you see in the Trump camp versus Harris?
I think all four go to Trump, and this is part of I think Trump wins with about 300 electoral college votes, or he loses narrowly. And I think bellwether for me is Nevada. So I'm very focused on what happens in Nevada. I think given that it is kind of close to the southern border, in that area where you have a lot of Californian transplants who've left and gone to Nevada, I think he takes Nevada. Georgia. North Carolina is more difficult, right, because of the Mark Robinson factor there.
Right.
But I would definitely give him those southern warmer states.
I agree with you. I think that's likely to hold for him. North Carolina, like you say, will probably be the narrowest victory there. The early numbers in Nevada in terms of mail-in ballots seem to be very strongly in his favor, so that's being seen as a good sign for a victory there. Okay, how about let's talk about the big three Midwestern states where the blue wall states, as it were, that went for Trump in 2016, went back to Biden in 2020. We've got Michigan, we've got Pennsylvania, we've got Wisconsin.
I think that Michigan should definitely land in Trump's side. I think the Arab American vote in Michigan, given their difficulty with Biden and others, might lead them away and have her lose a couple 100,000 votes there. I think Wisconsin, likewise, probably Trump. Pennsylvania, that's been polling very, very well for Trump. I think I'd place that in Trump's column as well. Although you just never know. Philadelphia is such a large part of that state and the suburbs there, and I could see Harris' campaign really being able in the last week or so to galvanize folks and get over the top there. So that sounds counter to everything that's out there. That Pennsylvania seems to be kind of neatly in Trump's column, but I probably think that Michigan and Wisconsin were more likely to go with Trump. Minnesota, I don't think there's enough firepower there to get Trump over the top. So I hate to do this, but if there was one state I was worried about, it would be Pennsylvania, and that would, if that goes over to the Harris column, what are we left at here?
Well, yeah. So without Pennsylvania, but with Michigan and Wisconsin, if I'm doing my math right, you end up at 293 for Trump.
Okay.
So that's obviously enough to get the win. For Harris, she really has to win all three of those. Assuming she loses the Sun Belt states we were talking about a moment ago, she can't afford to lose any of those three states. Any one of them puts Trump over the top. If she wins all three of those, he wins the other four, we get 270 Harris, 268 Trump, which of course is the nightmare scenario where everyone starts putting the screws on the actual voters, since they don't have to follow the majority in their state. Do we get faithless electors and that kind of thing? Or disaster of all disaster scenarios, let's suppose the one Nebraska district goes Trump. Now we go 269, 269, and the election goes to the House for the president and the Senate for the vice president. So all that real possibilities, not likely, I don't think, but real possibilities. If I had to pick, I think I would go with Michigan favoring Trump, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin going for Harris. And so I'm getting 283, 255 for the final number. Now, if that's what happens, Michigan has changed their law so that now you can start counting mail-in ballots 8 days before if you're a town of 5,000 or more people. So we should actually be able to know the Michigan result on Tuesday night. Pennsylvania, we will not know for sure because they can't start counting those ballots until the day of the election. So I really hope it doesn't come down to Pennsylvania because we're going to have the same kind of dynamic as last time where we're waiting 3 or 4 days and all the pressure, the legal questions and all the rest, right, which won't be healthy for anybody over the course of the rest of that week. So ideally, Pennsylvania doesn't matter and the election is decided before those Pennsylvania Electoral College votes come in. All right, Dave. Well, any last thoughts as we wrap it up? I feel like we've chipped off a little bit of the rust here, but it's been good and certainly enjoy the conversation and getting back to it, at least for this one-time opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, we'll see if anyone beyond kind of, your mom, or, my best friend or whoever contacts us and says, keep this thing going. I mean, my
Right.
worthless without democracy in America today. But no, it's been great to have these conversations. I think sometimes when we talk on the phone and we're like, well, we ought to do this, it's fun to banter and to think through, how things are taking place, right? This is what we did as college professors, teachers for so long. So it's always a great thing to get back in the habit of doing this and trying to encourage, even though we have our own opinions, better opinions on both sides. Great to be back with you, Matt. And who knows? Let's see what the reaction is to this episode. Maybe we'll be back before the year 2027.
We may very well. Reach us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. Thanks as always. Take care.
2020 vision.